Welcome to the Scapegoats podcast. Here are your hosts, Matt Mitro and Jordan Durrani, the Goats.
That's definitely where everybody turns us off. It's like these fucking jokers. You may want to try something.
The following stands for security purposes and is not to be taken to be federal advice. The views presented are loosely held positions of the host and in no way represent the organization which they are affiliated with. Man, it's Mother's Day, and we're about to talk about abortion.
Word to the mothers. The scapegoats love them some mothers.
I hope my mom's not listening.
My mom definitely may be listening. She's probably one of our 10% female listeners on our Spotify analytics. So shout out, Mom.
Wow. I still have not informed my parents that I am doing this risky media play. But props to you.
I'd like to think that they listen every week. They're one of our handful of listeners. They subscribe to the Patreon. It's basically like a quasi allowance.
Just what you need these days. Inflation, man, what are they paying? Like $10 a week now?
Thanks for the 2.5 gallons of gas, Mom. I appreciate that.
Yeah, well, happy Mother's Day to Mama Durrani, and all the mothers out there. Dude, yeah, should we get down to business here?
Yeah, bro was kind of the main topic this week. Pretty crazy, huh?
Yeah, man. 49 years of precedent just torn away theoretically by this leak that came out. I don't know. Do you have any starting thoughts on it?
Well, first things first, crazy that it came out via a leak. Like some clerk, has just had one hell of a week this past week, just looking over their shoulder constantly, trying to make sure they don't get pushed in front of a train, House of Cards style. Like the debate now where it's quite in question whether it was a liberal clerk or a conservative clerk, or even I've seen some theories online that it was one of the justices themselves because they don't have because of the lifetime appointment system, they don't have really any reason not to, or any recourse to prevent them from doing so. So who's to stop even Alito from just leaking his rough draft out to the masses?
If you had to guess, what would you say? Do you think it's on the conservative or the liberal side?
I'd probably guess liberal. The fact that there's been such a staunch reactionary force against this type of pre-draft type opinion clearly means, to me at least, that there is, at least from the clerk's point of view, an attempt to change the votes on the court themselves based on public reaction to this draft opinion. I don't know what kind of precedent that sets after the fact, because now whenever you disagree with the way that the court's about to rule, then who's to stop one of the clerks or even the justices themselves to just give it airtime and see what undoing can be done backstage.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I thought it was, it says a lot about, the policy itself, that this is something that's decided by the Supreme Court, and that, the Democrats, even when they've had supermajorities, I guess at the beginning of Obama's term and in the early 90s, they never codified this into legislation. I think that's part of the reason why it's become such a culture war issue, is because every election now becomes existential, right? It all comes down, to who's going to put the Supreme Court justices on. People are now slandering the notorious RBG for staying on the court too long and allowing for Trump to replace her. It seems to me like the entire setup of the court has almost been jeopardized by this, and now we're seeing a leak come out, which actually jeopardizes, the entire institution itself from the inside. It's pretty scary to see, and all the calls are coming, from both sides now, that there need to be changes made in that branch of government. It's just remarkable.
Very much so. The fact that RBG is now getting flack for this after all of this it's navel gazing at its finest. She was the bastion of the liberal wing for so long, and now after the fact, ex post trying to blame her for staying on during the Trump years. How could you have guessed? She did always have that, it feels like every year or so during the Obama administration, it was like, oh shit, RBG's got cancer again. She must have beat cancer at least hundreds of times.
It's really nonsensical. We should have an age limit for politicians and for the Supreme Court. It doesn't make sense that we have people who are losing their cognitive capabilities, are dealing with existential diseases, making decisions that are going to affect future generations for a long time. They're super consequential. I mean, to me, it makes no sense. I mean, you can even look at Biden, who has had his share of gaffes this year, and I guess there's no point really getting into how cognitively impaired or unimpaired he is at this point, because it clearly doesn't matter. But I mean, there needs to be some type of limit here, and that's just kind of a symptom as we get into this more. As our society ages, we have like a gerontocracy now, and it's becoming a problem, and it's something that we should have foreseen. But the incumbents, the people who have been in the system for such a long time, it's obviously not their incentive to do something like that.
Who's to stop now future presidents from just nominating like their favorite fresh out of law school graduates to the Supreme Court? I mean, in a world in which term limits are not something that's easily actionable, particularly because the branch of government that would adjudicate on that type of claim are the justices themselves. And so job security being very paramount to those types of folks. I don't know why the fuck they would ever want to impose those type of term limits on themselves. Like, now you've got ACB, who is in like her 40s, Kavanaugh, who's fairly young too, because, he partied in the 80s, listened to a lot of UB40 with Biff and Boof and shit. Like, I don't see why now you wouldn't just like, for any president making a nomination to the Supreme Court, it seems like the upper threshold for someone you'd consider has to be at least like 50. Like, you want a good 30 to 35 years of that person on the court.
Yeah, certainly. And I mean, at that point, we're getting into a whole new generation of people that have been educated in an entirely different way, about, I mean, I guess, you have the people coming up that are originalists who they've appointed. And then, I mean, it seems like the actual movements that are happening within law schools themselves are going to end up changing, the composition of the court. I do wonder, what it looks like, when you get like a 30-year-old justice who comes on these days, who's been indoctrinated with, I don't know, CRT or whatever, various legal theories are popular these days at Yale Law School. It's definitely an interesting dynamic that we see in terms of like the age and the aging society. But speaking of which, I think that one thing that gets missed in the entire debate over Roe v. Wade is like all of a sudden, because it's become such a culture war issue, it's an either yes or no question here, and there's no real middle ground where people start to think about I mean, what's the point where you should allow and unallow abortions, right? Like, is it 24 weeks? Is it 15 weeks? And I mean, I think you see the popularity of policies that ban abortion is like 20% approval, but if you change the framing of it to say, should abortion be banned after 15 weeks of pregnancy, then it goes up to like a 50% approval. And so I kind of think that this is the reason why, Democrats have not used their supermajorities in the past to actually legislate this and to, codify it into law, simply because it's so difficult to legislate, and because of what it's been made out to be, there's absolutely no middle ground there. Do you think it's possible for this to pass like in the legislative chambers of Congress?
Definitely not. And I think it goes back to how the constitution of parties and this issue existing in kind of a weird narrow band for both parties, in that because of the religious undercurrents that underpin a lot of folks' views on abortion, it kind of cuts across both parties in a way that's there are portions of the Democratic Party feels like that are, very religiously intertwined. There's a strong Catholic base, a strong Jewish base within the quote unquote big tent, that it feels like this issue almost cuts beside the kind of typical party litmus test in a way that prevents real consensus really on that side of the aisle. And on the flip side of that, Republicans have leaned in so hard to the religious right as a core base of their own voting population that any sort of like quote unquote middle ground within abortion seems very fraught, because those types of folks, especially in the Republican Party, who ever concede to a 15-week kind of line in the sand for abortion, are just going to get primaried the fuck out next election cycle by, the religious right, the more Tea Party centric side of the wing, the groups of folks that see abortion as a non-starter in any sort of political discourse.
Yeah, it seems like we've got to the point now where you either believe in, a woman's right to her body, or you believe in, or you believe that, we need to save the unborn in some way. I mean, and the fact of the matter is that totally gets out of, the scientific basis here, which is that, who knows what, people do know, when neural tubes form in the fetus, and like when you can actually start thinking about things, and we no longer have any sort of debate about that. And we also exist in a society where, the science is rapidly advancing in terms of reproduction. I mean, you look at things like in vitro fertilization, or this week I recently heard about in vitro gametogenesis, which is where they can actually take adult human cells, and turn them into egg cells. And using stem cell processes. And I mean, it's just kind of incredible, because when you have stuff like this, you can start to genetically engineer things, and you can start to say like, hey, this is the best, egg cell that we should use to have a child. Like, it has a higher IQ, or, higher characteristics there. And to me, I mean, it's just a very interesting conversation, because all this stuff sort of ties in to, do we want to be scientific about our procreation, or do we want to just leave it up to, to sexual reproduction?
Mm-hmm. And that's where, the idea that we create some sort of threshold in which abortion is okay before a certain point, or not okay afterwards in the eyes of law, it becomes a little bit hairy from my perspective, at least, because, with how, current, societal trends go, increase in the number of sexual partners, increase in sex before marriage, the medically induced way of going about abortion is unlike anything that could have existed in the framers' mindset per se. And using that lens to determine some sort of constitutionally determined right to privacy based on substantive due process feels very fraught in any sort of originalist context. Like the fact that this is not something that's happening in back alleys or with coat hangers or any other morbid examples. It's happening in, via a pill that is administered within 6 weeks of conception. Like that, that's where it becomes tough to reconcile that with the understanding that you view this in some sort of framers intent type lens or originalist mindset. And furthermore, the fact that, again, starting from the vantage point of understanding that Roe has been upheld by the court multiple times since Roe v. Wade, Planned Parenthood v. Casey, a couple other cases, the activism from the bench and understanding that judicial activism is just a throwaway line that you use when you don't agree with the court's decisions. That feels like a stark contrast to kind of the direction that recent decisions have been made for, things like gay marriage, interracial marriage, and the like. It really does feel like a step back. And starting from the lens of believing that individual autonomy and limited government are paramount in these types of decisions, I have a lot of struggle in justifying, a worldview in which my body, my choice is the heuristic to evaluate COVID vaccines, but also is thrown out the window when talking about, a woman's right to choose whether or not to terminate a pregnancy at some, normal or justified type line in the sand, as I got back to earlier, that 15 weeks or before the end of the second trimester, that type of, that just feels very, double-sided or hypocritical.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting that because it's become so polarized and such a one way or the other issue, nobody actually talks about the social impacts of these types of policies. And the social argument that the conservatives make, or that the evangelicals make, aside from the idea of saving the unborn, is just that we're allowing a society in which people are able to have these multiple sexual partners, or able to have way more sexual freedom and not be focused on raising a family, for example. And one interesting statistic I saw this past week is that since 2007, the birth rate in the United States has actually declined 20%. And I showed you this chart, and it's rather staggering when you see it. And when I looked at it, and I realized that it had gone down so much, especially after the pandemic and after 2020, it makes you think, is this whole thing just a coincidence? Or this is the conspiratorial side of me thinking here, or are we actually seeing that the highest powers and the highest echelons of the government are trying to turn this around and trying to turn around the birth rate simply because we have to as a nation? Now that's a total conspiracy. I have no actual evidence of that, but it's possible. But the second thing is that if we flip these arguments around, you can actually make a conservative case for abortion, and I think this is pretty funny because the conservative way that they look at it is they would say, and this is actually an argument that's been made on the conservative side. I'm not endorsing this myself, but the idea is that birth control actually defeminizes women and makes them lowers libido in women and makes them more or less interested in having a family simply because of the hormonal changes that it causes, and that's what caused like so many women to enter the workforce and try to stay in it and try to further careers, which is bullshit, whatever. But I mean that could be a conservative case that you make for saying that allowing for abortions and safe and legal abortions to happen would decrease the necessary reliance on birth control and allow for those type of trends to change. And on the flip side of that, I also have a progressive case against abortion, which is that because now men can get pregnant under the progressive mindset, you are enabling the patriarchy by giving men the ability to kill fetuses that could possibly be women or queer.
They are future Democratic voters potentially. So cutting them out of the mix is from the progressive partial ironic lens. It definitely underpins or takes it out at the knees from their ability to continue to drive that type of change in society from the legislative side or voting in numbers. I mean, what's fraught here is like there is a long storied history of abortion existing in society, not in ways that we condone, not in ways that seem, sightly to the layman or the naked eye, but the fact that we've seen this type of medical progress and the ability to do so in a way that at least aids in the ability for the woman to be healthy after the fact and notwithstanding all the, mental anguish that I'm sure comes after terminating a pregnancy, particularly one that has considerable medical effects. Like if that the child is not going to be able to be viable outside of the womb, and you find that out via ultrasound or CT scan or whatever, then having to carry that baby to term in the absence of a medically allowable abortion. The right to do so feels very, very fraught from a mental health perspective, and that really does feel like the crux of it, in not allowing the type of not loopholes, but the side constraints that would beget a abortion in the case of things like rape or incest. Those lack of constraints or the totalizing view that some states will take towards abortion. Think like the Bible Belt, Texas, my own home state. Like that is where it feels like this is such a stark contrast to what existed just like 3 or 4 years ago.
It's absolutely awful for the conservatives. It seems to me that this is just about the worst thing that could happen to them in terms of this next election cycle. Because I mean maybe this will get Democrats out to vote, but there's also very much just the fact that they're going to lose a lot of the down ballot elections in the future, and that the actual effects of this won't roll through for a few years.
Mm-hmm. This could be the October surprise coming early for Democrats. If I was, a Democrat political activist or a Politico in DC, this type of leak feels very, very opportune for, voters to be brought out to the ballot box and told to ignore the economic uncertainty that exists in today's climate, the fact that inflation is approaching double digits from a realized perspective, and continue to vote under these like social type wedge issues that are the like catalyst to getting folks out in numbers. Because what it does is it really proves true a lot of the narratives that were espoused during 2016 and 2020 that there is a judicial impetus to undo Roe. We thought at least that it was going to be something that was chipped away with. And I think that's the Roberts type middle ground that he was trying to articulate in some of the oral arguments that folks had, were kind of privy to and released out to the media. But now it seems like if this opinion were to hold true, that the utopian or dystopian world that Democrats like to create for the narratives that drive people out to the ballot box, that is happening in real life. And so this feels like a gift, a morbid one at that, but a gift to the Democrats in 2022.
Yeah, and that's exactly why I would think that a liberal was the one who leaked it, rather than a conservative. I mean, it's funny to me just to hear like, everybody has their own biases in this, and they're like, oh, it was leaked. Leaking is bad. Therefore, it was a conservative, or therefore it was a liberal. I mean, it's very much the in-group, out-group dynamics that we talked about before. On these same lines, I mean, look, like it's, from my tendencies to believe in a more libertarian outlook and that the government shouldn't be involved in these issues. It seems to me a total tragedy that we're having a change like this happen right now. And while I see, that a lot of this is just due to the divide that's happened politically and the increased polarization that's happened, it seems to me that it should be paramount for Democrats, if they want to campaign on this stuff, if they want to talk about it, then they should say the next time we have a supermajority, we are going to codify this into law. Do you think that they would do anything with the filibuster at this point?
I could see it. I mean, it feels like that gets thrown out almost as like a one-off justification for a lot of the policies that they feel like can be not necessarily railroaded through, but undone via the legislative apparatus. Like I want to say that Bernie released something that was like, we need to undo the filibuster in order to maintain the right for a woman to get these types of abortions, or have the right to do so within the existing set of rights that are codified to them, both from the legislative side and judicially. I am a little concerned about what the knock-on effects of that, because the political tides always change. And so creating that quote unquote precedent then only allows the other party to enact their own ends via non-supermajority type vote later on. But, do I see that as likely? I'm a little skeptical of it, but what feels like a direct next step from this is, if I was Joe, I would be definitely thinking more about my court packing plan after this. Do you think that's likely?
Interesting. I don't, for the simple reason that I think that Joe Biden in his heart is actually not very pro-choice. There's videos of him in the early 80s, I think, of him, defending, pro-life positions. And he's Catholic, right? He's been literally chastised by the Catholic Church for not supporting, the issue of pro-life. To me, that's just a fascinating aside. And it also makes me think that he just doesn't have the will to support changing the filibuster for an issue like this. I mean, I think that, there's increased pressure for it, but if they change the filibuster, it would really change, the fundamental way that the Senate works. I think that the argument that, Mitch McConnell will do this anyways is kind of, wrong. He hasn't done it yet, as he could have done it during the Trump presidency. I see it, but the thing is, if we continue to have split Congress where there is no supermajority and the government just keeps not getting anything done, eventually someone's going to come along and they're going to get rid of this filibuster. To me, it's interesting that you don't need the supermajority to get rid of the filibuster. That seems like I guess that was a protection that was stripped away before. And I mean, it's definitely not something that has to be there necessitated by law. So I see it going away in the long run. When that'll happen, really hard to say.
We would be remiss in this discussion without talking about how the makeup of the court has been affected by folks like Mitch McConnell, specifically speaking about Merrick Garland in 2016, where Scalia dies in the early years or the late year of the Obama administration, and Merrick Garland is appointed or is nominated by the Obama administration to take his spot. Mitch McConnell doesn't bring it to a floor vote, casts it away as something that's to be determined by the next president. Trump gets elected. He then has the ability to nominate two Supreme Court justices, Gorsuch and Kavanaugh, and then Ruth Bader Ginsburg dies like literally 2 months before the November election, and Republicans rush to push through Amy Coney Barrett. That type of political firebrand type politics feels directly responsible for these types of ends. I would be a little shocked if the next step that the court takes, given its extremely conservative composition, is beginning to chip away at things like Obergefell, given that it hasn't been upheld in the same type of manner that Roe has over the course of the last 49 years. I don't see why not now. The court changes its directive to continuing to enact the type of conservative policies that they see as tantamount to, a just society.
That's the scariest part of this whole thing to me, is that, I do think that, it's really starting to look like the legal cases that were made on these other issues were indeed flimsy. And, I think that it really gets back to the point that judicial activism, which, doesn't really mean all that much, right? It's only, activism if you lose. But I mean, the idea that these issues should be decided by the court seems rather wrong to me. And I think that we need to have, a strong-willed legislature that is willing to, to tackle these issues and to make it the case that we don't have to have, the types of culture wars that we have had about them. I mean, because the fact is that all of the polarization around these social issues is downstream of the fact that we have to fight over court seats like this. And everybody has talked about, packing the courts or, doing away with various, parts of the government. But the fact is that these issues themselves have been ignored because of the political expediency that's available to legislators in the past. And, because they've been more focused on other things and haven't actually focused on the social issues, they've allowed for, the social norms in the United States to completely not only just, erode, but become, mutable to the point where there can be change on the whims of one person dying and somebody else, getting impeached based on, or getting nominated and confirmed based on who's in power in any given day. That is not right? Like, that is not actually reflecting the will of the people. That's not, doing the things that need to be done. It's not passing policies that are able to deal with the types of middle grounds that we see when it comes to something like abortion. And because of that, we've seen all the downstream effects. And I worry that it's only going to get worse simply because those types of majorities are now no longer really available in the present.
Mm-hmm. Now that the Supreme Court has a pretty strong 6-3 conservative bias, with the swing vote now being Justice Roberts, who has sided with the liberal wing of the court multiple times now, particularly in upholding Obamacare, joining on Obergefell. Like, the fact that he is now the median justice feels very, very tough, at least going forward, from upholding the type of, progress or precedent that the court has set over the past, call it 20 years or so, with some of these landmark decisions. I do think that a little bit of the narrative around other rights being chipped away by the court does become a little bit overblown, when now it's like, oh, I wonder if the court's going to strike down the right for folks to marry interracially, or other types of, rights have been established by Supreme Court precedent. That feels like that's where, the wedge issues, or the fact that society doesn't question those ongoingly as, a matter of debate like abortion is, that's where it feels like that is kind of a little overblown, and feels like the type of scare politics that do attempt to drive folks out to the ballot box. And again, I really think that this is the type of catalyst that brings out Democratic turnout in 2022, and could be a silver lining to an otherwise very, very, sad moment in U.S. history.
Yeah. On the one hand, I think that it's possible that Democrat turnout, increases. However, on the other, I do think, that might only be the case, in some places, that it really changes the turnout. Like, it's not like the abortion restrictions are changing in California. Not that it really even, matters for this next election cycle. But the thing is that the economy still matters, and I think that's always going to be the biggest point in these elections. And when you have, such economic destruction as we've seen recently, with inflation, and with, the looming challenges to the labor market, despite the fact that it's strong right now, but really just, the problems that people are seeing every day, that's where I start to think that things could change. And, an interesting thing that ties in with this entire discussion on the social side is that J.D. Vance, who we've mentioned before, just won his primary in Ohio this past week. And some of the things he said are actually really interesting in terms of, working families and, what should the social structure look like in the United States. He's said that and this is kind of, the entire line of this sort of right-wing populist politics now, or at least the intellectual side of it, is that people should be able to raise a family on on a single income. And, the idea is that, because we've created a world in which, wages have not gone up with productivity, and, we've financialized so many things, people simply have to have both the mother and the father working in many families today in order to afford things, which makes it all the more important that people are able to get things like abortions when they can't afford to have a family. And so the policies that someone like him advocates are, allowing for us to get back to economic productivity in such a way that a single income can raise a family. Now, of course, on the Republican side, it's always the argument that that should be the man, I guess, in the family. And the idea is that women naturally prefer, child rearing. Now, I don't know, how, I don't think we can really postulate on that at all. But that's just the argument that he's making there. And to me, it seems like all of these issues are very intimately related in that they're about the social structure of what's available, right? And from my opinion, like I've said, I do think that, these are rights that people should have and choices that they should be able to make themselves. But if you look at the changes that have happened in the country over the past, 50 years, it's very much in such a way that it's become much harder for a family to simply subside on, a single income for one person to support a family. And that's also what's caused a lot of these issues to become more divisive and, for people to jump on to, I don't know what fifth wave feminism or whatever it's called now.
Yeah. I wonder how much of that is the, ability for productivity to continue to increase as, the marginal productivity of labor increases with, greater access and greater intertwining of the economic system to continue to fold these folks into the labor force and more higher wage type jobs. Or the second part of it, that real wage growth has not kept up with cost of living increases, with inflation outside of, say, maybe the past 12 months or so, taking a larger time horizon on that with 50 years plus as data points. The fact that hasn't only, creates the economic incentives for folks to have that type of dual income for that optionality, and that, a like fraught labor market, say one that was, akin to what was going on during, say, the 2008 to 2012 period, right, coming out of the Great Recession, where, having that flexibility in terms of, the type of exposure you have to different industries and the cyclicality of it only creates the economic incentives for families to diversify their exposure away from just the husband's job or just the wife's job into, two income sources that if one were to go away, then, the other can subside or subsidize the family's lifestyle while the husband continues to look for another job. Like it does feel like, that feels very, good as a policy point and the type of thing that, justifies the types of ends that he tries to seek, but it doesn't feel necessarily congruent with how, today's economic society works. Like if in a world in which especially the women are graduating college at a higher clip than men are, the value of their labor is much greater than, being a stay-at-home mom. And so as such, recognizing those ends only allows the kind of buffer against the potential economic headwinds that come from a labor market that is contracting or creates the type of uncertainty and near-term financial outlook for these families. So I don't know, all that to say that I don't know how a Senate candidate can come out and say that, because it feels like a nice to have at best. It's almost akin to saying like, it doesn't, it's not the type of thing that can be enacted via a policy measure,
Well, it's fascinating that the actual implication of it is that you should allow for, longer family leave. And this is what's happened in Scandinavian countries, is when they allow for longer family leave, more women have preferred to stay out of the workforce then. And so now there are actually some people on the left that aren't for the family leave policies. They're just for, child care policies and the idea that you should just be able to drop your kid off at daycare rather than, take care of them, as much as someone would have in the past. I don't know really where I fall in terms of the whole spectrum there, but I do think that nobody's actually asking the question, which is, what are our real preferences? Are the preferences for each person in a family to work and have a career and, to go after these things, or do some people want to stay with their children and to spend more time with raising them? Because that's a really fulfilling activity too. And it seems to me that we've gotten into a little bit of a nihilistic place here, where we've assumed that, everybody should have this, type of career or this type of, career that goes through all these hoops of credentialism that leads into the thing that we talked about last week, which is this professional managerial class. And when you start thinking about it like that, and you start asking, what are our actual social prerogatives here, it starts to really change the picture. Now, when you get down to the economic point that you mentioned, I do tend to agree. I don't know how you change the productivity of the nation in such a way that allows for that type of switch without a bunch of people leaving the workforce, whether it's the father or the mother or another type of family. It's a real question as to what are people's actual preferences here, and are we pushing people to deny what their real preferences are, and the idea of getting, just a higher wage job, right? I mean, have we done everything to such a hyper neoliberal degree that the only thing that matters is having a career with a high paying job, and we don't care about the things we used to care about, like families, like raising children, with nurture and care. And to me, all of these issues are what's coming up on both of these populist sentiments in the parties. And there's two different solutions for it that I find both would allow for, more social care from the government for families, but they're very different approaches to how you would go about it.
Mm-hmm. I really wonder how much of that is tied to, cost of living increases and the inability for the average family to sustain itself on one income in a lot of these high population type markets within the United States. Like it seems to dovetail very perfectly with, the rise in the inability for the average family to make a down payment on a starter home in the United States. The fact that starter homes aren't being built in the United States more generally because the preferences for larger homes that meet pro forma on, larger buildable square feet, yada, yada, yada. That only incentivizes families to have those two dual income sources in order to enact the type of American dream type lifestyle that everyone, seeks to go towards, like owning their own home, being able to pay for their kids' college. All of these feel like goals that are unable to be met if, real wage growth is stagnating, and particularly if you only have one income source in order to do so. To your point about the social idealism that is created within some sort of narrative that these folks like J.D. Vance and the Blake Masters of the world try to espouse. What is tough for me to reconcile there is it almost seems to put on this impetus of it feels like a nanny state type environment in which the idealized family nuclear structure that these folks try to perpetuate within this only seeks to undermine or cut out at the knees the types of folks who are dual income houses. And I don't know what the policy next step is there. The paid family leave one is interesting. I hadn't heard that these Scandinavian countries that in playing out the data, it creates the likelihood for women to leave the workforce in order to care for their children, be homemakers and the like. But it does feel very, somewhat reductionist in that, in a world post, what is it, 6th or 19th wave feminism that we live in today, that the toothpaste is out of the tube. You really can't put it back in. And we seem to be trending more towards a female dominated workforce than a male one, particularly in some of these, high paying professions where DEI initiatives only incent those types of workers in the workforce.
And to tie this back to the conservative case for abortion, this is because all these women are on birth control and it's defeminizing them. And this is entirely the reason why abortion should be allowed in the United States, so that women can get off birth control and get back to healthy hormonal levels.
What does that look like in practice? Like, is that like showing up every month or so and being like, I cooked up another one, doc?
I mean, I guess you really have to stay on top of it. If you take the unborn lives argument, it makes no sense at all. So I'm just joking around here, folks, just so you know. But I mean, yeah, no, I mean, all these social questions are so interesting. So, there's a lot of depth to them, and it's not something that obviously two dudes are going to answer on a podcast immediately. But I think that people aren't getting the full actual picture of what's going on here when you just look at what's put out by the media these days. Because I mean, they're just trying to sell the neoliberal dream still. That America has these values that need to be spread across the world, and we can be able to outsource our economy and live in globalization. That's no longer the case anymore. And as we see, the nation start to nationalize certain things again, or to bring things back on shore, we're gonna see a lot of differences happen. And I think if something does happen that allows for the economy to go back, to that one income family, it'll be two things. It'll be, first, the power of the worker will be going up in the United States, and their wages, their real wages, will start to outpace inflation, which would be objectively a good thing. And I think that the way that you do that, actually, this gets to a kind of deep critique of the way that business is run today in the United States, is that you need to stop the financialization of all these companies, where you allow them to take on a lot of debt, or you allow private equity firms to roll up more and more businesses with more and more debt and try to run them so efficiently, just to pay back the debt and then to make a return on the equity. Doing that kind of thing is what allows them to say that they should keep wages low, because they say that they're having these business benefits for the shareholders, who are themselves, in the case of private equity, but it doesn't actually benefit any of the workers that are working for the business. It doesn't necessarily benefit the customers, because they're cutting out things to get to better margins that would have improved the products. And this type of financialization, which we've been able to do largely because rates have been going down for 40 years up until this past year, because of that, we've been able to basically just keep refinancing the debt as the rates have gone down, and to push out these costs more and more, to become more and more lean on these business lines, when in reality, the actual growth and productivity could be better if we paid people better and increased consumption at home, rather than just allowing for us to continue, like I said, financializing these businesses with more and more debt, buying them out, reshuffling them to each other. These private equity firms sell between each other. They sell it to themselves sometimes through a new fund. This is the type of critique that needs to be made in American business these days, that nobody is willing to say, simply because there's so much power and so much lobbying that these organizations are able to do on Capitol Hill.
Yeah, the scapegoats go accidentally leftist. It feels very strongly about how the shareholder capitalism type mindset here feels pretty paramount, when the capital allocation decisions that are made at the executive level are not one that inspire or create the incentives to make real wages keep up with cost of living and increases in the decreases in the purchasing power that each American family feels. Like the trade-off between paying people a above market prevailing wage versus continuing to buy back shares in the open market to inflate the stock price feels very strong. And even those capital allocation decisions can be trade off with their ability to continue to spend further on R&D, which necessitates more high skill labor within those companies themselves. And so creates more jobs, creates more high paying jobs at that. And the trade-off between continuing to spend there and get the far out into the future growth projections versus the almost today morphine drip that comes with the uplift in share prices from these buyback programs that are announced. It's diametrically opposed. And you raise a very interesting point about the bargaining power of labor itself. That feels like the necessary step in order to get to that one income family model that these folks talk about, is increasing the ability for workers to collectively bargain and push back against these types of corporatist shareholder driven type measures that are enacted within these companies. Like the progressive decline of unions over the past 50 or 60 years or so seems to directly tie to the lack of families to sustain on one income.
See, this is where we get into a difference here, because I don't think that collective bargaining is the answer to that type of labor pressure. I think that what you actually need, and what is probably going to end up happening, is that you're going to have a strongman type politician come in who's not like Trump, not like someone who's just a facade of a strongman, which I know I'm lowering our chances of getting him on the podcast here. But I mean, it's not just the facade of a strongman. It's someone who's actually going to come in like Teddy Roosevelt would be the best example of this, who came in and did a bunch of trust busting. Who comes in and who starts breaking up the structure of these large private equity firms that allow for trillions of dollars to be moved around and shuffled in such a way that it only benefits their returns. And to me, that's going to take a lot of power. It's not something that can just be done on collective bargaining agreements, because you'll see things like what happened with Amazon this past week, where they actually, the union, there was one union at one warehouse, one Amazon warehouse that formed in New York, and then the warehouse that was like down the street tried to do a similar vote this this past week, and they lost horribly, and were not able to get the union set up. I mean, unions had a bunch of problems within themselves. They had their own power structures, and there is definitely a history where unions have done good things. But I think that these days what we actually need is a much stronger legislative and or executive power to come in and break up some of these systems, because otherwise it's just not going to happen. And I guess to your point, the unions have just lost so much power over the past century that there's no real way for them to actually claw themselves back. And it's not going to happen just through, collective bargaining agreements, because the corporations at this point are able to, to change ownership before you get to that stage.
Yeah, it's a fair point that the long-standing decline in unions only proves out the inability for them to effectuate change at the company or worker-based level. But I think I saw the statistic that the proportion of the American labor force that had collective bargaining access in 1950 or so was about 35 to 37%. In today's numbers, it's sub 10%. And so the erosion of that ability for workers to demand wages that keep up with, the market type conditions, the cost of living increases, only feels like it comes from the workers themselves. And today feels like a particularly interesting point now, given that we are in a seller's market for labor. The Great Resignation is still happening in mass. I think the March numbers came out and there was no decrease in folks continuing to quit their jobs in droves. I hear you on the idea that they have their own problems. It's fodder for every mafia movie that was made in the past 20 or 30 years. It's the ties to organized crime and, the misallocation of dollars from the pension side level that these unions continue to operate under in this quasi regulatory environment. But I don't know how a legislative or executive type mandate can check that back, short of, creating some sort of wage control type floor for the rates that are paid to these workers. And while that seems very easy to do from the policymaker standpoint, it also creates the bad economic ends that come with any sort of wage control parameters that are placed on what people are paid.
Well, I think that there's another issue that really affects this argument, and it's twofold. The first is that the power of the individual has been augmented by technology, and the fact that we can have a creator economy where people are able to make money by taking booty videos and amongst many other means. I mean, it's really allowing for people to gain economic freedom, and so far it's only a small proportion of people. But as technology has evolved and as it continues to evolve, it could very much be the case that people can have more individual creative jobs, because technology is enabling them to do that or to be more productive through it. And the other side of that, the second point about this, is that artificial intelligence has been rapidly advancing, and the ability for automation to increase productivity is what could actually get us to the point where you have some type of a social net, like a universal basic income. And this is even something that Peter Thiel has talked about. He said, yes, I would be okay with a social, social backdrop like that allows everybody to actually live, on a government, wage, if it happens in line with productivity, such that automation allows for us to actually create way more things than we're creating at this point, and to build new and better things, and to continue to innovate on the human spirit. Then you would have a situation which we are investing more in the R&D that allows for that new innovation and for more jobs, for better jobs, and then also have the creative individuals, or the individuals who are just building things, who are coding up some protocol that allows for them to make a crypto Ponzi scheme and therefore live free forever. This is the kind of thing that's going to continue happening more and more and become more and more common as people become more and more technologically adept.
What is the tipping point, do you think, that where from a labor force standpoint, that if automation, AI, RPA, and the like perpetuate within these corporations, and the lower skill type jobs that are made redundant from these technology advancements come to take hold or take shape within these companies, Where is the tipping point where you see universal basic income as the necessary kind of check back against those trends? Like, is it a labor force participation rate of sub 55, sub 50? Like, if all these jobs are made redundant by these technology advancements and the increase in productivity that's commensurate with it, where do we get to the threshold in which it's like, oh shit, in order to prevent rebellions in the street, we probably have to dole out some more government cheese?
Well, it's going to be gradual. And that's a great point, that it's going to actually lead to like revolutionary types of thought in the long run if you don't start making those changes. And the thing is, I don't know if there's a specific tipping point where you hit a fulcrum, and it might be something where you increase the amount that the government pays out each year, and you as in lockstep with automation increasing productivity and taking people out of the workforce. But the other thing is that as you get these new, AI tools, people are going to be able to build different things. I mean, even not just AI, but you look at something like CRISPR, like you could have a gene editing system in your own home, for the cost of it is just going down and down and down. And as the cost of these technologies go down, the types of demand that you can create on the other side and the types of supply that you can create individually is going to keep going up. So I think that, there's going to be it's going to be a change in the shape of the economy and the way that it works, the way that each individual person's work actually happens. Before it's the case that people are just, chilling out on their couch all day, I don't know, not actually accomplishing things, just consuming TikTok video after TikTok video. I think that people are still going to want to accomplish things, and they're still going to be able to do that, and it's just going to look very different. There'll be a creative side of it, and then there'll be a side of it where people are utilizing AI. I mean, biochemistry has been rapidly advancing as well, like I mentioned with gene editing. So there's going to be definite verticals of growth that come out here. I mean, not to mention like space exploration and quantum computing. There are many revolutionary level technologies in the fermentation phase right now that have not actually gotten to the point where they're ready to drink.
I'm going to take the accidental leftist switch and turn it to accidental fascist. Imagine if in our society we prioritized at the elementary and middle school level teaching children how to code and be participants in the new technology apparatuses that are clearly going to be the economic drivers of prosperity for those folks at the individual micro level going forward when they're 30 or 35, instead of talking about things like why babies are racist and why you need to have a white apologist mindset when talking to people of other different races.
Amen, man. Amen. This is the problem in the United States, and it's actually something that even Ray Dalio talks about in his book about the changing world order, is that one of the things that happens when you start having these late stage societies where you're printing more and more money and there's less productivity, there's more populism, is that the ability to educate goes way down, and that is what actually ends up eroding the society at the end. This is the most important issue of our time, which is that we need to overhaul public education in the United States. We need to vastly improve the way that we're teaching, mathematics and different STEM topics, like coding, like you just mentioned. The fact that we're not doing that, the fact that we're squabbling over stupid shit like the Don't Say Gay bill, and all these identity politics is to the total detriment of the next generation. And I mean, even with the pandemic, upending so many educations, that's going to be a huge, degrowth moment as well. So this is, in my opinion, the biggest issue, and it's the thing that society should really be focused on, which is the next generation and creating a better world for them that so many of our politicians have gotten far away from in their views on world domination through neoliberal ideas.
This is a new topic for us, so I'm excited for it. But in my limited understanding of what the broader platform points are for folks like Masters and Vance, from what I understand, they are proponents of the school choice model. Do you see that as potentially being a consumer type check back against the meandering or off-course type public education system that we have today, or is that just going to create the same type of inequalities that it seeks to rectify?
No, I mean, I think that I think that school choice is important. It's something that should be available. There should be more like a market there. I mean, the teachers unions have done absolutely detrimental things to children at this point. and they need to be checked back in terms of their power as well. But overall, I think more than school choice or any single incremental policy like that, we really just need massive investment in this. And this is something where I'd be willing to say, hey, federal government, you just spent $6 trillion on COVID, which is still happening, apparently. This is what we should be spending money on, right? Put $1 trillion into the public education system. Make it so that teachers are paid super high wages that allow for them to be coveted jobs and that people actually want to do, and that is a very fulfilling life that somebody can live a single, that can raise a family on that single income. That's how I feel about it. And I don't know, where JD Vance or Blake Masters, would go with that type of idea. I kind of think that they fall more into the sort of Platonist camp that only the brightest students really need the best education. But I think that's a bad idea, and that we should really be trying to, raise the education level across the entire population as much as possible, for every single student. I think every single person, can have better development. We should invest more in children's nutrition as well on a large scale basis. These are the issues that have really gone under the radar, that I think people are just way too focused on the immediate future. What did they get out of it? Rather than, and like the scarcity mindset, rather than thinking about, hey, how do we plan? How do we get wise leaders in the future? How do we get wise people throughout our society and create, better, more innovative businesses in the long run?
Imagine if we spent the $80+ billion in war aid that we gave to Ukraine over the past week or so, which was about 3% of their GDP, just cut a single check, gave them some howitzers, gave them some tanks, and used that to commensurately and equivalently increase all teacher salaries across the board. Imagine that. It's a Tupac quote. We got money for wars, but can't feed the poor. We can't educate the poor. We can't bring them up into a position that they are, economic participants in society, not now and not in the future.
Kamala Harris couldn't have said it better herself. But honestly, and to that point, Jill Biden, who is I guess she has a doctorate in children's education or something. I'm totally butchering that. I'm sorry, Jill, if you ever somehow hear this. But anyways, she's in Ukraine right now. She took a visit to Kiev this weekend without Joe, by the way, which, what is going on here? Why is she doing this? Yeah, that is such a great way to put it, is why are we putting these billions and billions of dollars into war, creating or continuing our interventionist tactics internationally? That's the type of thing where I think we should be doing more domestic investment, 100%.
That's where Trump had a winning message. America first necessarily entails turning a blind eye to things that may not be, in line with the growth of American hegemony or hard power in these far-flung regions of the world, which American people do not exist in. Our impetus for making change in the U.S. is less so when it trades off with, continuing to supply military equipment to the Ukrainian government, to continuing to arm rebels in Yemen, to continuing to have these bases far flung across the globe, which don't necessarily continue to further our own ends, because the perception of American hegemony has turned so hard against us in the international order as us being seen as the aggressor with our multi-state apparatus. These all seem to be justifications for continuing to spend more at home and less abroad. That's where I really think Trump's message was a winner.
That's true. And that's why I think JD Vance is going to be president someday. I'll call it right now. I'll call the shot. Either him or AOC, one of them will. Maybe they'll run on the same ticket. That'd be funny. But actually on the Ukraine point, man, it really does seem like we're getting drawn in here. Over this past week, there are all these reports about how the United States helped them target several, Russian generals and warships. And those are the kind of things. And then even, I think Biden even came out and said hey, the media reporting on this stuff, not very useful. They had to actually, tout out some guy from one of the government departments and actually say that, no, we're not helping Ukraine target these, these targets, right? This is escalation, and it's a slow moving, disaster that keeps on happening on an international foreign policy basis, which is exactly what, this whole foreign policy establishment, the blob, as it's colloquially called in DC, has been pushing for from day one. And I think it's going to continue. You see the EU proposed a Russia oil ban this past week. It's getting messy.
Very much so. If Ukraine killed COVID. I feel like Roe started to kill Ukraine a little bit this past week. I feel like the media coverage here has been a little bit less so, particularly in the context of the past month or two, where it was this like never-ending fire alarm type sound, where war was inevitable and that we're going to, create new World War III type problems within society. And it feels like that is starting to, the boredom calculus is starting to set in for the American public, where it's still very much an issue by and large, but the attention is starting to wane.
We're on to the next current thing. It's I support the current thing, right? I support the Ukraine. I support, COVID measures or whatever. And it's actually interesting. Tomorrow, May 9th, is a holiday in Russia called Victory Day. I believe it celebrates World War II or something like that. But that's a little bit scary. That kind of coincides with, a perfect point for Putin to ratchet something up or to try to do something for show. Scary little, premonition to make.
How many of these news reports can be released where it's clear that we're obviously supplying Ukraine with a mass amount of military equipment, where the NATO support for these types of groups within the region is, increasing or definitely not subsiding in any sort of way? The news reports are coming out that we helped them sink the major battleship with like 500 plus Russians on board. When does enough become enough from Putin's side and just, decide to go for it and attack the military shipments that he's already said are legitimate targets?
Yeah, I think he said they're going to go after them, and I don't see why he wouldn't from his perspective. There has been continued escalation, continued agreements. Like the United States said that we'd give security guarantees to Finland and NATO to Finland and Sweden while their NATO applications were under review. That's another, that's not, these are the kind of things that lead to more of this foreign intervention. And I think that we're making a massive fumble here, and it's kind of in line with Joe Biden's history as a leader when it comes to foreign policy. He's failed again and again and again. And you hate to see it. But while we're on the topic, like I said, the EU has proposed this Russian oil ban, and we saw this past week, OPEC Plus decided that they were only going to hike oil supplies by the little amount that they had already planned to. And, natural gas prices in the United States hit a 9 handle, the highest price in many, many years, 20 years at least. It's getting pretty, scary from the commodity side of things. And this next week, we're going to see the new CPI and PPI data. So we're going to get more inflation news and see, how hot it's running. I don't know. Do you have any takes on commodities on what's been happening recently there?
It's interesting how in some areas of the commodity world that over the past 2 or 3 weeks, they've definitely consolidated among a different range. It feels like they were very reactionary to the news coming out of Ukraine day by day, where, there was a massive run up called about a month and a half or 2 months ago. And it's kind of started to subside or decrease a little bit after that blow off top type run up. But now, given that the market is starting to price in continued unrest in Ukraine, continued supply disruptions, continued lack of investment in energy capabilities here at home, that we are in for dire times, at least from the energy side. The fact that natural gas is back up to $9 per cubic foot, that only shows that we're starting to enter the stagflationary type period that rhymes very well with the 1970s. I mean, the CPI print's going to be pretty brutal. I would imagine that there's going to be some thumbs on the scale from Washington. I'd imagine Jen Psaki or whatever, the new black woman of color lesbian that's taking her place, is going to come out and say that the print is going to be pretty bad to message things. So in for another markets in turmoil week from the CNBC crew.
Yeah. I mean, I guess we should just get into markets generally here. The Fed, this past week, they hiked rates like everybody expected, 50 basis points. Equities rallied on the day of the Fed hike after Powell came out and did his little spiel like he always does. And he said that a 75 basis point hike was off the table. Markets kind of loved this. They thought they were getting some certainty at first, at least according to CNBC. But what really happened the next 2 days after is markets crashed back down, and they ended the week almost unchanged. Equities did from where they began the last week, while rates rose a lot. And I still think that, we're at a point where it's a bit oversold in terms of the markets right now. It seems that there's been an overreaction, to all these changes. The old adage is you can't fight the Fed or don't fight the Fed. And as the Fed continues to raise rates, as they continue to do this, I think we still have a long ways down to go. I think the S&P could trade under 3,000 at some point this year or early next year. And it's at 4,000. It's at like 4,200, 4,100 right now for anyone who isn't tracking that. Which, why aren't you? But anyways, no, I mean, you hear like Jeff Gundlach come out after the Fed and he says, like, look, it seems like the rates market has kind of, oversold this a bit. Rates have gotten a little bit too high. They've gotten ahead of his favorite gauge, which is the copper to gold ratio, which gives an idea of, how much copper is being used in types of production that are done industrially versus gold, the overall value, versus the monetary supply. So that kind of shows that, that production has actually slowed down quite a bit. If the value of gold, or not the value of gold, if the value of copper has gone down so much, and that should imply that the 10-year yield, should drop below 3%, when right now I think it's at like 3.1. If that happens, you could start to see equities come back and be like, all right, we overreacted a bit. But I think later this year, they're going to start being like, maybe there needs to be a 75 basis point hike. Maybe this new CPI data comes out bad. Maybe, we realize that this Russian situation isn't stopping anytime soon. And again, like, all this could flip as soon as if the war were just to end one day and, and everything just, turns around. We allow Russian commodities back on the market. But it's looking more and more like that's not going to be the case. It's looking more and more like the housing market is getting destroyed by all this. Home affordability has been destroyed by rates. I think it's like dropped, like, you can only acquire something with 25% the down payment you could, or 75% the down payment you could before, or of the monthly payment you could before. So yeah, I mean, all this stuff, adds up to me to say, like, we are in quite a precarious position when it comes to the economy.
What do you think explains the reaction to Powell's speech over on Wednesday? I think the NASDAQ was up about 3.5%, 4%. And then the commensurate drop 6% the day after, another 2% down the day after that on Friday. Are equity markets starting to, call the Fed's bluff per se on, the inability for them to curtail inflation with only 50 bips rate hikes in the near term? Or are they starting to price in the inability for the Fed to take action and responding more aggressively in the back half of 2022?
Yeah, so if we listen to David Tepper, who came on Friday and commented on this, and him and Jeff Gundlach are probably my two favorite investors and market commentators. What David Tepper said was that what the Fed really did is they actually made things quite uncertain. I mean, the day after, or on Friday, James Bullard, who's one of the Fed officials, probably the most hawkish of them, came out and said, 75 basis point hike, it's not off the table. And so what David Tepper then said is that, there is still a lot of uncertainty in this market. And, even though we thought we had certainty coming out of Powell's speech on Wednesday, that wasn't the case. In fact, there is actually much more uncertainty now, because now we don't know, whether conditions are going to change to such a point that inflation increases and they have to change their policy on the fly, like they've done multiple times so far during this rate hiking cycle. And so that's one thing. And then the other thing is that probably the markets are also starting to price in the slowdown in the economy, the drop in growth. Like Facebook said they're doing a hiring freeze this past week. Even though the payrolls report came out strong, we added more jobs than we thought we would this past week. We had Facebook saying that. We've had Amazon say they're going to stop, staffing for capacity. We've had multiple companies say that they're just going to keep trying to push through price increases. I've seen a lot of, from the tech Twitter sphere, different startups are freezing their hiring practices as well. So there's definitely a situation happening where the economy is also slowing down. And then there's all the uncertainty in the rate market. And then there's just equity sitting there like, what the fuck's going to happen?
Mm-hmm. When do you think that there will ever be, I guess, in the near term, if the market starts to price in this type of Fed uncertainty in the back half of 2022 and equities react pretty violently, say that there's another week or two of massive drops, call it 5-10% or so, does Powell stop in or jump in and kind of change his tone a bit to a more moderate or dovish stance to create some sort of floor in the equity markets akin to what happened in like late 2018?
There's definitely a chance of that, particularly with the political, midterms coming up later this year. I think that if Powell, were to do that, it would either create a situation where the market, is like, you're not getting control of inflation like you said you would, what the fuck? Or it'll end up being the case that the market or that the economy is actually slowing down, and Powell's just responding to that, and all of a sudden everything comes to a screeching halt, and there's some big shock to the system that happens. It could be coming out of China, where they have tripled down now on their COVID zero policy this past week, where the Chinese premier came out and said that there's a huge issue with employment happening now, and we are very worried that unemployment is going to hit massive, is going to be massive in China, and that they are actually probably in a recession right now. So if you look at Chinese demand going away, that's another place where a lot of U.S. corporates are actually going to lose, not only growth verticals, but also a large portion of their business for some companies like, I don't know, Nike. So yeah, I mean, it's very much a mix of things, and what Powell ends up doing, the fact that they haven't actually been going for a policy where they have a definitive idea of it. They're just trying to do this data driven response to whatever happens before. To me, that increases the possibility of a policy error, and that's pretty much what David Tepper echoed on Friday.
My favorite owner in the NFL, just to put it out there too. Shout out Panthers. Shout out white running backs. The news that was the most stark to me this past week was the consumer credit numbers that came out with inflation going gangbusters right now. Shout out gangbusters. It seems like consumers are in droves continuing to max out credit cards, continuing to tap into line of credit to check back against the lack of wage growth that has not kept up with the runaway inflation that we've seen over the past, call it 4 and 5 months. And so that leverage, that over leveraging from the consumer side is only going to create further demand headwinds in that back half. And so I really don't know how the Fed can continue to be hawkish in the 6 to 12 months from this like inflation concern perspective, given that the consumer with the amount of leverage that they've undertaken, those rates are just about to tick up with the variable rate structure that they employ. It very much feels like we could see a consumer driven shock, the type of one that creates the type of cratering that equities don't necessarily like, the earnings pressure.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I think it's highly likely, we only get to 4 or 5 hikes this year before the consumer starts to bottom out based off all of the, lack of stimulus that they've had. I still have the theory that Joe Biden will try to pass stimulus checks right before the midterms. I feel it in my bones that it's coming. I mean, it really does depend on that slowdown happening and the consumer realizing that they can't pay back all this, stuff that they've had. And if companies continue to pass on price increases, like all the CEOs in America have said over the past few weeks during earnings, it's going to be a huge issue, because at a certain point, that demand destruction is going to hit.
Mm-hmm. I mean, shit, consumer discretionary was down just as much as tech was this past week too. They got absolutely clobbered. And so the market's starting to take that view that, the American consumer is not doing particularly hot right now. That's only evidenced further by the, credit numbers that came out this past week.
Yeah, and I think we'll particularly see it, really, show itself in the housing market. It seems to me like we've really allowed for, housing prices are at their highest level that they've been, in since 2008 at least. I mean, some people think affordability is even worse since then. It seems to me that all of that, there's going to be all these people left with, a lot of their net worth tied up in their houses. When when they try to sell it, they're not going to be able to get anywhere near the same price for it. They're going to have to mark that down. That in turn, to your point, rolls through on the leverage side of things for the rest of the consumer credit that they've been taking out. And eventually it all has to come undone. And we've had 10 years of low rates. We've had 10 years of companies over levering and buying back their stocks, and, private equity companies rolling up every dental office that they can and every other type of company that they can. And these are the types of things that don't work when you get into a low growth or a no growth environment, or when you get into a boom and bust cycle that repeats itself over and over again over short periods.
The housing point's pretty salient too, with how prices do not, the price opacity and the lack of liquidity from a housing side. It feels like that is a sector, more generally speaking about real estate, that they are the most vulnerable to those types of price shocks, given that it's unlike equities where they trade in massive droves every day, every hour, every second during open trading windows for the exchanges. When prices reset from a real estate side, it creates almost the bank run type environments where the fire sales start to occur, where everyone tries to sell the top in housing, in commercial real estate, and prices can react very violently from that. Now, taken in further to account that a commercial mortgage or residential mortgage has, gone up 200, 300 bips, call it in the past 3 months or so, decreases the amount of buyer appetite for those buyer pools that would try and, catch that type of falling knife. And so when those values reset and the consumer sees their net worth, take a 20 or 25% haircut, more in line with trend than what they experienced over the past, call it 2 years or so, that only further justifies tightening the belt.
I gotta say, as someone who would like to be a homeowner, it would be very nice for those prices to come down, and also to not be paying these crazy rents and the crazy rent increases that they're going to try to pass on in LA. I have a theory that because people are moving away from big cities like LA, that this summer when they try to do all these major rent increases, or when people, start getting out of these rent policies where they've had like 2 months of free rent as a promotion, but now they're locked into the higher rent rate for this next year, it's going to cause like a ripple effect where all of a sudden they're not going to be able to re-rent all these places and prices are going to go down. And exactly what you said about, how that affects the actual rate of people having demand for houses or for second houses or apartments or multifamily. It feels very trepidatious, but hopefully that allows for more power from the consumer side.
That's a very good PSA. Whenever your landlord on a new lease says that he'll give you 2 months free, you got to be always skeptical on the back end, because when you go to renew, the rent increase that he bakes in, or he or she or they bakes in after the fact, is going to be on your asking rents, not the effective rents. And so as such, you're going to get a 3 to 5% increase over the normal rate that you would have paid, not the effective rents that you pay after the concessions are baked into. So rise up against the system.
Yeah, watch out. Yeah, man, it's definitely crazy with the housing market right now.
Is there any updates from the quality of life factors in Los Angeles? Have you been watching your six more, less? Any crazy crime stories?
Well, there was one this past week. I went to see a little-known comedian at the Hollywood Bowl named David Chappelle, and he got attacked on stage towards the end of the show, where he was pretty much finishing up the show. Dude jumps on stage, tries to tackle him. This guy apparently had a knife, which was disguised as a gun. Very American. I don't know why that was your logic to get through the metal detectors there, but yeah, so this guy, and then, you see what happens. Like the DA says they're not going to charge the guy. The guy got absolutely destroyed by all the bouncers and various people were there. It was pretty funny. Like Chris Rock had just performed before he opened for Dave Chappelle. He comes on the stage and is like, "Is that Will Smith?" And Dave Chappelle goes, "It was a trans man."
So why did he not get charged?
I think he's probably going to get charged with a misdemeanor, but the DA the DA George Gascon has a policy basically of just not charging people with felonies unless they've actually killed someone and they have direct proof of it. It's become a mess, man. The rule of law in LA has totally degraded. We've talked about this before, but you can steal from your convenience store. You can, there's a ton of impunity here for people. There's all these, robberies where people follow wealthy people home and try to steal stuff from them. It's very scary. And yeah, I've definitely been watching my six, and it's definitely worrisome with the increase in inflation that's going on, as well as the increase in the temperature outside. The higher heat usually causes more crime. And so, yeah, as the economy starts to deteriorate, is something that I'm very cognizant of.
That's wild that you could attack somebody in the Hollywood Bowl in front of thousands upon thousands of people. I guess he fucked up. David Tepper's not trying to get him on the Carolina Panthers, but with his tackling form. But
no, Dave Chappelle took it like a champ, man. He didn't even see the guy coming, but the guy tries to tackle him, bounces off Chappelle, and then Chappelle falls down, probably because he was like a little drunk and just smoked like 5 cigarettes during his show. But he gets up, man. I mean, it's wild. And, the other thing is just that, I mean, after the whole Will Smith hitting Chris Rock thing, which seemed more about Jada, but anyways, we shouldn't be like attacking comedians, for Christ's sakes. Like, this just shows you, like the types of, I mean, I get the arguments against like civility when neither side is going to practice it when it comes to politics, but there's a difference between, talking with flamboyant rhetoric and actually violently attacking people. I think it's wrong that people have condoned for violence in many different situations. And it's the kind of, it's a good example just of why that, a place where that shouldn't be happening.
Brought a knife to a gunfight. So damn sad. His arm looked like, he was like trying to do the walk like an Egyptian dance or create the Pythagorean theorem proofs with his bodily structure. He got fucked up.
Yeah, I mean, dude, people love Dave Chappelle. Like he's got a whole crew with him. Like he's not the type of, he wasn't like Chris Rock and just, smoothly walked it off after, in the middle of the Oscars or whatever. It was just a wild thing to see, honestly. Everybody in the crowd was like, is that real? Like, was that staged? Because we had just seen like Chris Rock perform. Like Dave Chappelle had talked about what happened with Chris and Will Smith. I mean, it was surreal. It was surreal for sure. One of the craziest things I've ever seen live. Classic
split between rich and poor. Will Smith gets up on stage, slaps him, walks very nonchalantly back to his seat, and is allowed to get an award after the fact. This guy, working class, average Joe American, just wants to, work on his tackling form on Dave Chappelle. Boom. Next thing you know, back of the ambulance. Yeah. Where is American society gone?
I'm not going to take the other side on, or that side on that one. But speaking of American society, I think that the other big events that happened this past week were two things that are different but pretty much the same, which are the Milken Conference and the Met Gala. And so, I mean, the Milken Conference, for people who don't know, is like a West Coast Davos where like all the, biggest business honchos or whatever come and give like panels to each other. They're actually all live streamed this year, which provides some good entertainment if you're interested in conversations that are similar but not as entertaining as this one. And then the Met Gala is obviously just a charity event where people show up and do, I don't know, crazy looking fashion stuff to say that they're in the name of charity when they go and have dinner at the Met Museum. I think that these two events are both, very, symptomatic of just this upper class in the United States that likes to have these types of ivory tower things that people go to and that are mostly just for show, but are really just to rub elbows and talk about how inflation is like the 1970s again and make some jokes about it on the inside. I don't know. You have any Met Gala or Milken takes?
Well, I'll flip it right back on you. Who do you think was the best and worst dressed at both the Met Gala and the Milken Conference?
Michael Milken looked pristine up there for an 80-year-old man who spent some time in jail.
Who are you wearing?
I honestly didn't keep up with this at all. I saw that Elon Musk went to the Met Gala, which was just funny to see. He wore like a I guess like a Victorian tuxedo or something. I don't know. Steve Schwarzman actually went to the Met Gala too. He wore a top hat. That's the CEO of Blackstone for anyone. And he looked like the Monopoly man. That was probably my favorite.
That's pretty the undertones there are they're screaming loud. I'm sure him and Kylie Jenner had some great side table conversation. She's probably going to be an LP in Blackstone's next big fundraise.
They're trying to buy the rights to her Instagram right now. 7 times levered. It'll 10% IRR on it. It'll work out in the end.
She loves talking to other fellow self-made billionaires.
Self-made, yeah.
The go.